my class, Fundamentals of Single Rapier. You guys honor me by coming out and listening to what I have to say, so thanks for coming out, I guess. I really did write this with the intent of being sort of like a real basics class, so I'm going to basically start with fighting positions and then move on to guards and grip styles. So I think maybe for some of you this is going to be kind of, hey, I already know this, but then as we progress, hopefully you'll pick up something that you're interested in. So I guess I'll get started. Okay, so one of the reasons that I agreed to fight this class is I do a lot of teaching and I move around a lot, and I primarily fight single rapier. Well, obviously I'm authorized in all the fighting styles, and I have others that I enjoy. Fighting single is my favorite, you know, for no other reason. I'm kind of lazy. The single sword, there's a lot less to think about. I don't have another sword, or, you know, if you really think about it, fencing is a complicated sport. There's a lot happening. You know, you're worried about your body position, your guard, your sword, your opponent's guard, his sword. You know, there's a lot going on and a lot to pay attention to. So while I already touched on that, I'll move into fighting stances. And for the single fighter, primarily you'll see most people teach, and I do too to my students, what we call an offensive stance. And by offensive, I mean that your primary sword, your sword hand is forward, okay? For the single fighter, I mean, this is really your optimum, you know, your optimum position. Your blade is the closest it can be to your opponent, and you are the farthest you can be away from your opponent, you know, while still being sort of in the fight. In the defensive position, it's just the opposite, right? It's a defensive position. You're in a position where you're able to defend yourself a little bit better because you can employ your hand or what have you, but it's harder to attack from that position because you have to make the transition to come back on guard. Okay. So, fighting position, you know, it's pretty simple, but you see, you know, and I think it's just training, you know. Your local training is the lowest common denominator, so sometimes people have great training, sometimes people have not so great training. You know, it's just indicative of how our sport sort of started and how it's organized, you know, especially since training usually falls on the local marshal, who may not be someone who's, you know, from a lot of avenues qualified to teach someone to fight. He's authorized, he's watched people authorize, he's participated in you know, and authorizations and inspections. He's qualified to make sure people are participating safely, but that might not necessarily mean he's a good teacher. So these people do the best they can, and their students do the best they can to learn, but they're still, it's hard to overcome. Most people are only as good as the best people in their group. So if they're not traveling a lot, it's hard to overcome. But, sorry, I started rambling a little. So fighting stances, what I profess is usually pretty simple, and how you get there is actually pretty straightforward. I always kind of come at it from the idea, almost like if I was the opposite, as if I was boxing someone, you know, where you're defensive. But, so if you're standing towards sideways to your opponent, and I rotate my foot by the heel so that my foot is pointing towards my opponent, right? That's pretty straightforward. The idea being is without really putting any effort on my body, I could reach my hand out and touch my opponent. Does that make sense? I hope so. I just said it, so if I sound dumb, everybody's going to roll out of here and go, man, Colin just ran his mouth for an hour. Boy, did he sound dumb. So,
that won't be till later.
Yeah, thanks. Wait till I'm drunk to tell me I sounded really dumb, okay? Don't worry, it'll happen. So if you guys all want to take a chance to come out here and face towards me, you can face up towards your opponents if you love your people across the room from you if you like. Okay, so the idea being is that this has to be a comfortable position. This is the position that you spend the most time in while you're fighting, is your on guard position. So for me, I always try to stand where my feet are approximately shoulders width apart. But I'm not going to tell you that that's how you have to do it. When you're in this position, you have to find that distance for your feet to be apart that's going to be comfortable to you. And the two factors to really keep in mind when you're in this position are, well, A, am I comfortable? If you're too far apart and you feel like your weight's on more on one knee than the other, right, you're going to put some stress on that joint, and it's not really comfortable to stand in for an extended period. Extended, I mean 60 seconds. 60 seconds is a long time in a rapier fight.
Yeah.
For your back foot, I always try to keep my back foot so that I'm somewhere between perpendicular to my opponent or parallel to my opponent, I guess, and maybe like say a 45-degree angle pointed towards them. The idea being is that, and the second part I was going to say about the stances, when you're talking about your comfort, you want to make sure that you're in a position so that if you need to transition your feet, you can do so without having to make like the push. Oh, I need to change my guards. You can do so with just moving your feet versus if you're too low, or even I have a habit of doing this where you're leaned down onto one foot. If you have to retreat, which unfortunately it happens, sometimes you have to retreat, you have to push off to do that, and when you have to shift your weight in that fashion, you're at a real disadvantage, right? Because it's hard for you to control your action. If you want to stop or change directions, it's real hard to do that, because then you have to shove that weight in another direction. So from there, I wanted to talk a little bit about, say, right, you're on guard, pointing towards your opponent. Great. So from this position, even without your sword, you should be able to reasonably lift your hand out and point it towards your opponent without any real effort, right? If you feel like you're having to push your arm to one side or the other to make that happen, move your back foot in such a way so that you're moving your body with your back foot. So your body's really oriented towards, right? That's the word I'm looking for, oriented. Your body's really oriented towards your opponent in a very natural way. With that, one of the things that you're looking for with this guard is to maintain your offhand shoulder as far back as you possibly can, right? And this is something that you kind of have to teach yourself, because when you're holding your hands, when you're facing towards someone, it's kind of natural to want to roll your shoulder forward a little bit to square off. But tactically, this is a bad decision, because, well, right? This is what's keeping you alive, right? And this is a pretty narrow piece of material. You and your arm, this blade and your arm are basically your protection against your opponent. And if you're standing like this, you got a nice big flat spot for them to stab at, which is not a great plan. And you're wide here, right? Even the most narrow of us, like Leo over there, stands sideways to me, right? I mean, in my perspective, he's this wide from
That's
here.
not perspective, I really am all
Right.
that.
When he squares off against me, right, he's this wide. So, I mean, from a targeting perspective, this is a lot easier to strike into versus if he's sideways. You got used to the test dummy in the last class, didn't you?
Yes.
Right. And so, also, when you're working your parries, this is a lot smaller area to have to work to defend. Questions? I mean, this is all pretty straightforward stuff. At least I think it is. But if you have questions, don't. If you have a question, do not hesitate to jump in and stop me. Otherwise, I will assume you understand and continue.
Colin?
Yes.
What do you do if you,
Christina, right?
Yeah.
Christina.
What do you do if you feel like it sometimes works better for you to be like this, mostly due to armor choices?
Just do the best you can. In the end, you have to take a fighting stance that's comfortable for you, right? Obviously, some body types, due to just body width or physical condition or whatever, you're not going to be able to take that classical flat stance. Just the point is to make yourself as narrow a target as possible and still be able to manipulate your weapons and your arms, okay? One of my points is here is there's not always a wrong way to do something. I know in some of the classical styles, they always teach you must do it like this. You must have your sword in this position. You must stand with your feet 18 inches apart. I want to walk away from that, and I want to talk about comfort, importance of guard and position, and then move into, when we talk about defending and attacks, how you can use body position and riposte. And anyways, I'm not a big fan of conventional fencing teaching because we teach people to do things badly, especially since in the SCA Rapier we have a lot of people, and this is even how I came up. We learn a lot from collegiate modern fencing, right? But as our weapons get larger, some of those skills have to change. The super ding ding, the super tight, epee and foil parries, while they can be used to great effect in the game we play, you have to understand the difference in the physics of the weapons to understand how to adapt them to what we do. Okay, guards, on guards. Grips. I'm basically going to talk about two sword grips. One, because it's traditionally like what most people use. Most people use, I guess we'll call it the French grip. I am not a period technique fighter, which you've probably already guessed. But I'd like to think that, in the time that I've been fighting, I'll pick up something that you'll be able to pass along. So in a traditional grip or French grip, you'll have one or two fingers in the guard. Really, that's a comfort and control level thing, right? So this form has a lot of advantages. It's very strong. It creates strong parries. And for the traditional attack vectors, it's very strong in that regard. It makes strong attacks, strong defense. In my opinion, it lacks some agility. So the other guard that I'm going to talk about is the Italian grip. And like in collegiate and modern fencing, the Italian grip has pretty much gone to the wayside because since they primarily use pistol grips, it's hard to adapt that style to the newer weapons. But basically, for the Italian grip, you're basically going to hold your sword to your opponent like it's a stick, right? With the flat of the blade pointed towards them. And put a finger through the ring, like sort of like you were holding it in a French grip, except you're going to put your blade so it's flat and rest your thumb on top of the keys. This is the Colin MacNish gunslinger grip. It's actually period, so it's actually documentable. Sorry, I hold my sword like this, flat to my opponent, with my thumb on top. It's awkward. Sure. Sorry. Yeah, like that. Sorry. This is not probably a grip that you're used to seeing. It's actually a documentable guard. It's Tybalt, I believe.
Yes.
So yeah. So for me, or at least the way I fight, this guard gives me a lot of agility. Sorry, I didn't make my way around. Like this. Like you're holding a stick, basically, except you rest your thumb on the keys. Yeah, palm down. Okay. I know it's not exactly like the Italian grip because they do the weird thing. But that's the basic idea. If you're doing it, because I fight this way right-handed or left-handed, it's the same idea. Right across the bottom, thumb on the keys. It takes some getting used to.
Now, when you fight, you actually
and you can do it to the center.
You change position where you're here as well when you come across at all, or do you?
I'll show you. So, the grip that I use, in my opinion, has a disadvantage sometimes. It is sometimes susceptible to hard, like, I can be flipped like sometimes like that. If someone hard cracks my blade to attack, right? I have a pretty strong grip. It doesn't happen to me that often. Smack my top of my blade. Right? But also sometimes from the bottom, since the bottom of my sword is somewhat unsupported at the very pommel, I can sometimes be cracked up. The trade-off is some agility. I believe that this grip, at least for me, again, experiment, right? I'm going to talk about styles, but I'm not telling you which one is right, wrong, or indifferent. You have to play with it and see what's going to work for you. For me, this style opens up some movements. I can flip my arm around from side to side with relative ease. I can still rotate through all of the 4 parries, but it's a different arm movement than you would traditionally think of with the French grip if you're going through the parries. It's a different movement. And for me, I can rotate through those positions a lot more fluidly with a different grip. Okay. Any questions about that? I know I kind of flew through that part. When I started this class, I was like, man, how am I going to come up with enough material for an hour?
I have a question.
And then 4 pages in, yes, you? What's your name? Okay.
When you're rotated, you're obviously rotating the blade. How does that affect your blade on?
Did you get it?
That's a great question. Hey, Leo, come over here.
Can I interrupt for a second?
No, sorry, no,
I'm gonna
please
shift
do.
you to a bigger room.
Sure.
Would you like to shift to a bigger
Sure.
room?
These
This does not suck.
We're gonna go to the stress hall.
I'm already, yeah, like you're big. Sure, why not?